Hello everyone, this is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Thank you for attending the April CSIA webinar. Today's webinar is the third and final in a series of 3 on configuration management. It focuses on software systems that support CM implementation. This series is intended to clear the fog on configuration management, which there tends to be a lot of amongst our members. Be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, but feel free to enter them as we go along. The webinar will be archived for later viewing, and the slides will be available also. The host and sponsor of our monthly business topic webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but are investing in a relationship where you depend on your suppliers to be there every step of the way. Software Toolbox encourages your engineers to understand the value of their time. Don't let them spend hours troubleshooting remote OPC connections. Send them to softwaretoolbox.com/OPC for expert help and affordable off-the-shelf solutions. John Weber of Software Toolbox hopes to see you at the CSIA conference next week, particularly at the Partner Expo. Now, I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Nishant Sani. Nishant graduated with a master's degree in manufacturing systems engineering from North Carolina State University. He joined Avid Solutions as a systems integrator in 2010. He has a great interest and experience in manufacturing information systems and cybersecurity. Driving project efficiency using better information systems has also been one of his primary areas of interest at Avid Solutions. So, without further delay, here's Nishant.
Thank you everyone for attending. Today we will be talking about CM using software systems. And this is the part 3 in the 3-part series. So that's what we talked about in the previous webinars. And now we're going to talk about the software systems. Again, as Bob said, I am Nishant Sani. I am an automation system integrator with Avid Solutions. I've been working with Avid Solutions for almost 5 years now. So let's go over the agenda real quick, just to see what we're going to talk about. So first of all, we are going to review the part 1 and part 2, just to recap what we already discussed. Then we're going to talk about the big picture, what we are trying to get to, what our goals are, and what it would look like. Then we are going to talk about the implementation plan, how we actually achieve what we are talking about. And then there would be a brief discussion on Agile project management techniques. It might feel a little bit odd here, but bear with me, it will make sense as we get to that topic. Then we can move on to the Q&A sections if you have any questions. So let's get started with the review. So in part 1, we discussed what the configuration management is all about. We had 2 distinct and clear messages that are like CM is about change control and CM is about improving the reliability of the information. So let's talk a little bit about CM is about change control. So we discussed that with the background of a V model, which is essentially a lifecycle management model. We discussed how at various points of time in that model there would be configuration items associated, and considering the snapshot of those items is what part of what the management of those items is. So say in the requirement, you have a couple of deliverables, a couple of documents that you're trying to manage. And as you move through the phases, some changes happen and those will change. So to manage what has changed is part of it. Then we also talked about why it changed. That brings in the issue management portion of it, of how do you link, what actually caused that change and what exactly changed and who changed it. Then we talked about that CM is about getting reliable information to questions like who has been working on that software, what got changed because of this new requirement that customer threw our way, and questions like why did we change this again, like those kind of questions we need reliable answers to. So that's what we are aiming for. Then we talked about, in the part 2, we talked about how to do those things manually. Right? We essentially talked about a plan, do, check, act cycle, where we are trying to figure all these things out manually. So plan, essentially what we are doing is we are identifying what needs controlling, who is responsible for what, and how do we implement the process. What are the policies, procedures we established to achieve this, and then we implement those policies, and then periodically verify or do audit checks and see where we are lacking, and then again modify our plan or increase training to achieve the desired result, and this rinse and repeat the same thing until we get there. So with the manual systems, what you would achieve is essentially would look like something like this. So you have a folder structure where you are managing all your versions, neatly stacking everything, and with the minor versions, major versions, and all that kind of stuff, and what has changed. You maybe have a text file in there that describes what and who changed, all this kind of things. So as you can see, this thing can get, doing it manually can get quite cumbersome as projects become more complex. So if you are controlling 10 things and not just one software output, how do you manage all that with this thing? You would probably have 10 different similar setups of version 4, version 2, version for each deliverable, and that way, or you would end up duplicating a lot of information. So that's where the automated systems step in and make your life easier. So before we go talk about the software systems, let's talk a little bit about what's the big picture here. Why should we even care? So I kind of specifically put this slide for the business folks who sometimes have a hard time justifying the need to embrace configuration management. So there are two distinct goals or two distinct advantages we are trying to get from here. First one is to increase the efficiency. How? There is less wasted time in file management, searching, answering questions like what I need to do, reduced repeated effort. Somebody is already working on something that you are also working on. Protection from loss of work, the file got lost, and all those kind of questions, and just in general encouraging more collaboration among the team members. And last but not the least, just empowerment of the employees by awareness. When everyone knows what is happening, and the benefits of those are just immense, that cannot be just easily quantified here. The other thing we are after here is higher quality. Higher quality typically means happy customers are repeat customers. So higher quality, what is things we are talking about, like oops, we forgot to include, we forgot to answer that question, we forgot to include that requirement in our changes. There are generally less mistakes. There are less of those kind of things. Like we probably sent you the wrong thing. There is more clarity on what we did and why we did. So when next time the customer asks a question, we have a answer ready, and just a general good project management, because we have good view of what we are doing. And what does it all lead to? kind of gets it right, more money. Okay, maybe that's just a little bit too much, but you get the idea, right? So we're gonna talk a little bit about still staying on the big picture to see, if we do all those things, what our project management, what our daily lives, or what that would look like. So let's just first look at it from the view of a project manager. From that view to see how they are going to look at it and manage this. So say you have a project. So what you start with is you divide your projects in tasks, subtasks, and stuff at the planning stage. That's probably some of the things you already do. But here we are going to go more granular and define better tasks, better subtasking, so we can actually assign those tasks to the employees and capture them that way. So each of this task would have things like progress tracking, who is it assigned to, what's the due date, and all that, all those attributes, that whatever attributes that are more relevant to you. But these are just the ones that are kind of essential for the bigger picture. And at each layer there would be a roll up that would tell you the overall progress percentage and how we are doing on track and stuff. And if you would notice, there is also something called rev history here. Don't worry if you don't understand the terminology, right? We would get to them when we talk about the software systems. So essentially what you have here is associated with the task, you also have a detail of what got changed due to that. So commit A essentially is your is the listing that tells you what all files got changed, by who it got changed, and what the content that got changed. So you have full visibility onto how each task is affecting the actual work. So now let's go forward. We talked about that CM is about change control. So as we know, changes always happen during the project. So how do you handle a change? So when a change comes up, what you do is you stick to that, the same structure of organization. What you want to do is mark it as an issue. That issue, I'm calling it an issue, but it can very well be anything like a requirement change or some actual technical issue or a new task or something like that. Now that issue, if you notice, looks very similar as task. It will have all the same attributes. It would have everything similar to what what the task had. It would have a rev history which indicates what got changed, who changed it, and all that kind of stuff. So we have a full tracking of this was the requirement change, and those are all the things that got changed with it. So that's kind of the top-down view from what the project manager would see or do. They would assign tasks, they would monitor due dates and intervene when necessary. So now let's look at the same thing from the bottom-up view. Bottom-up means what essentially what the engineers who are actually working on the project would see. So here is my project. I organized that into neat little folders, quite good organization, I may say here, and subfolder, and I'm working on the files that are, say, file A or B. File B is a PLC program I'm working on. And if you notice, this has what the file has associated the metadata with it is the rev history, which indicates what got changed, by who it got changed, and also the linkage with the actual task and the issue. So it gives me a complete picture of, okay, this got changed and this is why it got changed. And while I work, I keep on continuing doing the same thing. When I update the file to a new version, I write a good commit message and link it up to the issue, and that's how it rolls up into the top-down view. So I hope we got an idea of what we are trying to achieve or what the eventual thing would, kind of look like. So that's keeping in mind that that's where we are trying to get at. Let's see how we can get there. So you might be familiar with this diagram because we presented in the part 1 or part 2 of the webinar. So how to get there? Initially, we talk about archiving. So that's the basic one. At least we are doing a good job of managing what is the latest version. We don't care about the history, we don't care about the rest of the stuff at this point, but at least we are doing a good job archiving everything. So next comes is versioning, where we are not only storing actual history, we have the full tracking of which issue, what got changed, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in the next slides, but let me complete that. Then the next comes is issue tracking. So versioning is for the most part, just versioning your work, what got changed. So you have a good list of what got changed and at what point and by who it got changed. Now, issue tracking, what issue tracking provides is that top-down linkage with the issues of why it got changed, for what purpose we made that change. And once we are there, we can talk a little bit about how all this plays together in overall project management, or giving us some advantages of using this, to improve our project management techniques and drive more results out of this. All right, so let's talk about versioning. So that's essentially what we're trying to avoid. So we would have all come across these kind of things, every day, pretty much. Like the rule of the thumb is never tag something as final. There is nothing final. So we will see how we can avoid all this by using some automated software systems and how we implement those. All right, so first thing first, no amount of versioning, whatever it is, can combat poor information organization. If you are just going to throw things wherever you wish, like throwing them, no matter what you do with version control, it's not going to help. So the first thing is to choose an organization structure, a folder structure wherever you're storing your information. Choose something that works for you and stick with it. Here is an example that works for us, and again, that's an example only. That same thing might not work for you. So just let's get to the point first where you have a good structure of where you are putting things at, and then let's move forward from there. So now we have the good organizations. Once we have the good organization structure set up, then we can talk about how we are going to use the software to help us out. So there are many version control softwares out there. I have listed these 3 because I think those represent a good from each section of it. So subversion is a centralized version control system where everything is stored centrally. Git belongs to the family of a distributed control system, a distributed version control system, which is very popular these days, but doesn't exactly lend itself to ease of use. Then there is version dog, which is somewhat of a specialized centralized version control system. It has some extra features like PLC program compares and some HMI program compares and whatnot. So first, we're going to talk about implementation using subversion. So version control system, essentially, it's like a server client model. So you have a server that's responsible for storing, versioning all your, everything centrally. So we have a few options for servers. Like, I listed those options. You can read it here: subversion, visual SVN, WAN disco, and similarly, some options for the client side. So for this particular instance, we will talk about using visual SVN server and as a server side option, and tortoise SVN as a client side option. And you can see the reasons I chose those. Both of those are free. Which helps quite a bit. And Tortoise SVN is also open source, so if you do like it and you use it, please don't forget to donate to the Tortoise SVN community. So what the visual SVN gives you is, of course, it is free. It supports a web protocol, and it's rock solid. They have been in business for quite a while, and they're pretty good. Similarly, with Tortoise SVN, it's free, open source. It has a Windows shell integration, so it has very little impact on how you work. You can still keep continuing working from your folders, folder structure, same files. There are no sites to upload to, and all those kind of things. So to get started, the first thing we need to do, of course, is to install the server and establish a repository. So that's a very easy install. You can download the SVN server from their website and install it pretty quick. I'm just going to go over a few best practices of installing and using that server. First thing I talk about is access over HTTPS. So it supports web protocol. You can do HTTP or HTTPS. I recommend HTTPS because you want to secure your information, your project information. It needs to be accessible only by certain people. So setting up SSL requires just a little bit of more work. You have to buy an SSL certificate and install on your server, but it is very well worth it. And other thing is to use Active Directory authentication, which it supports out of the box. So essentially, what we would be doing is your employees could just use their normal creds to get onto and access the repositories. Just some naming convention and preferences. We would typically set up just one repository per project. There are many ways to do, set up repositories in SVN, but I think we found that that's kind of what works best for us. And the other thing to do is to standardize your naming conventions for the repository. So they are, it is clear when somebody is looking at your repository list of what belongs where. Typically, we include a project name or a project number in our repository naming. All right, so once we have the server set up, let's talk a little bit about how that centralized version control would work. All right, so you have a server which is storing, all your files, all your everything else along with the version history, commit history, and everything. So the way it typically works is you set up your client, and client would request a local copy for itself from the server. And there can be as many clients as possible. There is no restriction there. Each client would, so that first step is called a checkout. And the checkout doesn't really lock anything on the server side, so there could be like 10 people who are checking out the same, who can check out the same thing. So checkout does it establishes a local copy where they can work off the files locally. And once they have the local copy set up, the typical thing that they would do is pull updates from the server, things that have changed, or write changes back to the server. So we call them typically updates, and the changes going up is commits. Now commit also contains commit message and possibly any linking to the issues and everything that happens there. So as you can see, since evident somewhat by the icons that you are still working with files and folders and all that kind of stuff. So it's not totally different from what you are actually used to. There is less barrier to entry here. So then let's go into what the client side looks like. So if you just look at the pictures a little bit here, you can see what it would look like. So green check marks mean everything is great, up to date. Typically red would indicate that you have changes locally, but you haven't committed them. So you can commit those, and that it would become available for everyone else to update. So that's what it's going to look like from your, on your computer when we are working on it. And the way Tortoise SVN integrates with your Windows is it puts a menu in the right click of the Windows, so you can go to that menu and do things to the working copy like we talked about: update, delete, revert. Revert is go back to the version, discard all my changes that I made locally, and things like that. It has some of the advanced features of merging, branching, and all that kind of stuff too. So let's talk about the best practices when using this. So when you are using version control on the client side, the first thing, or basic things to avoid are just avoid using any prefixes or suffixes in file name. That's kind of what we are trying to get away from. Don't use underscore old, underscore final, or underscore date, or any of that kind of stuff. The way those things are managed are by utilizing trunk, tags, and branches. So trunk in this context would always be your latest and greatest stuff. So at any point of time, anyone should be able to go to the trunk and pick up the latest file without asking any questions to anybody else. So that's the idea that goes along there. Tags are essentially you are tagging major, minor versions. So say you send something to the client on that, and that you want to tag that as version 1.0. So that's what tagging does. So the way tagging works in the client is you don't have to copy files to tag it over. A tag is essentially a snapshot of a trunk at a point of time, right? So when you are ready to mark something in the trunk, you just go simply right click and mark it and tag it. It's that simple as that. You don't copy stuff, you don't do anything like that. It just keeps track of that. And branching is essentially for doing experimental stuff. Is essentially you are working on something, you're working on a PLC program, and you would like to try out some things, but you don't want that to stay in your latest and greatest copy until you have figured out if it works or not. So that's what branching is for. So another thing to do is commit often. There is no restriction on I only have to commit when I have a newer version 1.2 or version 1.3 or something. You are essentially saving all your work as you go along. So commit at the end of the day, commit when you make a change, commit as often as you like. And doing the commit, always try to write descriptive comments, and if there is issue and task linking, just always remember to put those linkages in your commit message. And the other thing to be careful about when using the SVN client is when you are moving, renaming, or reorganizing things, you have to do it a certain way. You have to do it using the SVN rename command and SVN move command. When I say command, I don't mean type something in the command line. It is all through a GUI, through that right-click interface. But you ought to remember to do that so that the file preserves its history. Now that we have a little bit glimpse of the client, let's see what, to get the fuller picture of what it kind of looks like. So that's your commit log for one of the examples demo stuff I took for. You can see what, it has the author, it has the date and the message of what happened, what he did and what got changed. And if you look at particular revision, it has a detail of, more details of what file got changed. And if you want to look at those files, it can even tell you what exactly got changed by using, diffs and stuff. Of course, these kind of things only work for textual kind of files. Tortoise SVN is now good enough to do word compares and Excel compares also. But as system integrators, we deal with, n number of different formats and files like PLCs, ACDs, this and that. So you cannot go into the detail of the diffs there, by right click, but you can always track down 2 revisions and compare them in your PLC compare program or whatnot. And also in those kind of scenarios, that's why the commit message is important. It's because as detailed as you can be in your commit message would give you a much better idea of what got changed and why it got changed. All right, so that's kind of what the look for the versioning system was using a couple of softwares we mentioned. But again, these are the software I just chose because of you would have equally good amount of results with any of the other options that are out there. Though for the client, Tortoise is kind of the go-to standard for the client side. So now we move to the next portion, which is the issue tracking. So versioning gives you one part of it, which you are committing, you are keeping all the track of everything that happens, but there is still that missing portion of why it got changed and how it links back to tasks and management of that portion. So that's where issue management or task management softwares can help us. This is just a listing of a few of those things. I'm not going to go into the implementation details, but I will discuss in a little bit of what each of these software has to offer and what we should look for when we are kind of selecting issue management or a task management software. Although I'm calling it an issue management, essentially I'm going for issue task management and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about a few of those options, on the next few slides. So, they vary a lot in the feature set of what you get online, and there are always new online softwares and sites that are coming up. So to set a little bit of guidelines for how do we want to select those, is what we need is source code management integration, which essentially what I'm talking about, it needs to relate back to my versioning software. It needs to relate back to my commits, so I can link my issues and what is actually happening. Another thing it needs to do is to have a comprehensive task management system, so I can do all those things we talked about, like subtask issues, progress tracking, due dates, and all that kind of stuff. And then we also need to consider the cost and scalability to the project. So the few of the systems that I mentioned here, I'll discuss a few open source systems first. So let's talk about Mantis. Mantis is mostly designed as a bug tracking or a issue tracking thing. It is open source. It has some of that source code integration that we were talking about. Doesn't have that much comprehensive task management, but there are some other features like wikis and all those kind of things. We have Redmine, which is a little bit more featured project management kind of software. Some of the same things as Mantis, but some extra features as activity streams and stuff. And then there is Track, which again looks quite a lot similar to Redmine. Now let's talk about a couple of more options that are more full-featured to kind of what we need here. So one is Jira. It's very popular issue or task management system. It has advanced SCM integration, has features like time tracking, Agile project management, having knowledge base, etc. The downside is, of course, not free and not open source, and the cost is proportional to the user count. And then comes SharePoint. So I always have a hard time discussing SharePoint because SharePoint is more generalized kind of software. It was meant to be just a normal content management system. Then people started tacking on a whole lot of other things to it. So it's kind of prevalent in many organizations. So if you are not married to SharePoint, I would suggest to look elsewhere like Jira and all those kind of things to get started with. But if you are doing SharePoint, then that can also be used for issue management and task management, but it needs to be, of course, customized to get to the level of where we want to be. And the customization would depend on each and every customer and how good or bad their SharePoint team is. The other thing that's missing from here is the SCM integration, the source code management integration. Doesn't have anything built in, but that doesn't prohibit you from developing your own thing. That's kind of the highlight for what issue management systems we can use, and we already had a look of how we want, what we want to do with those issue management systems. We essentially want to track all our projects or log all our projects, divide them into chunks of tasks, subtasks, and when the change comes, log in an issue and track everything based off of that. So what software you choose to get there is it would kind of depend on what you want to get at. And the other thing I want to mention is you don't really have to use a full-fledged software. You can start doing those things by Excel, of course, but you wouldn't have all those automated linkages and stuff we talked about. But nevertheless, that could be the start of your issue tracking or task management system. Right, now we have talked about the versioning and the issue management. Let's talk a little bit about the Agile project management and how it kind of relates back to what we are talking about. So the reason I put this in here is Agile management probably deserves its own separate webinar, but I wanted to talk about that if we have proper configuration management, if we are in that mode of tasks and linkages and commits where we have a full visibility on what and how is happening, then we can move to different project management techniques that might help us leverage or realize much more efficiency out of our project execution. So just to go over it briefly, you all know the traditional model that we kind of follow. We start a project, we build up a plan, and the plan has, we fix the requirements, then we fix the design, then you develop, then you do testing, and then you deploy. But the basic thing about this is these things always change. I mean, no matter what you do, you cannot fix. This model is made with the mindset of that you fix things in time. Like, when you are going to development, the design should be kind of fixed. When you are going to testing, the development should be kind of fixed. And then when problems arises, it kind of rolls back and you have to change from top layer to bottom layer, everything. And that's what the kind of risk that kind of accumulates over the period, and the deploy is where all the risk comes. And that's why you kind of have those, late night startups and stuff where everybody is trying to just change everything and, trying to make it work. So if we, from this point of view, if we do understand that it is going to change, so it kind of makes sense to not try and expect that it's going to be fixed definitions at points in time. So that's kind of what Agile would try to do. Agile methodology would try to do. So instead of taking it as in big chunks of requirement design, development, testing, we divide it into smaller chunks. And with each chunk, we do the same thing. We do design, test, integrate, develop, all those kind of things. So at the end of each of those brackets, we end up with a working deliverable. So that's the concept of Agile, and that's kind of what we could do with that would be much easier or much better to implement if we have all those tasking, linkages, and everything set up. So we can actually move forward and do those kind of things successfully. If you talk about Agile, I mean, all the principles would not directly apply here, because Agile requires that anybody who is part of the team is involved in each and every step. So if you look at that smaller bucket, you have at the end of each cycle, you have feedback from the customer and stuff. So it may not be possible for us to go to such a level, but we can certainly utilize those principles to deliver results, in a much better fashion. So that was Agile. Again, it definitely warrants its own webinar to try and figure out how we can apply those techniques back to some things that system integrators do. But I just wanted to give you a taste of that, where that's kind of where we can get to and leverage all this that we have done to actually produce some good differentiating management techniques that can help us succeed. All right, I think that is it from my side. If there are any questions, just let us know.
Nishant, this is Bob Lowe. I have a question for you. On one of your earlier slides, you mentioned across disciplines, that would be full-blown configuration management. Could you give examples of what you mean by different disciplines within a system integration?
So different disciplines in the sense you were talking about, in this particular scenario, we talk, enrolling everybody into that environment. We haven't touched onto how do you include customer feedback and customer into there and that portion, and if somebody else is handling your testing and design documentation and stuff, how do you handle those kind of things? So once we go full blown is essentially, rolling this thing, rolling it out to external systems and something that's, not only in your little project team.
Oh, okay. Very good. Are there any other questions that you can either post or, okay, here we have a question just came in. Nishan, can you see that? The question?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, I'll let you look at that and answer.
So, trying to understand what, so you're saying if software is developed and we are talking about, okay, I think I understand what we are trying to get at here is that you are developing something, some software for a particular project, and then you controlled it there. But what happens if they come up, if they want you to change that software in the later revisions or later stuff? So in our context, we are talking. We would be, I would contextualize that as a project information. So I would start tracking it, start with the latest version that is possible put into the new project and start tracking it from there. Because there are merits to both kind of things, but I think we decided to track everything with the project context. It would be the same thing for any other common items that you would have for other things. Like, there are common documents that are applicable to multiple projects. But so that's kind of decision what you have to make. The decision we made is to track it with the project contextualization. So a project is kind of like beginning and start of the new thing. It doesn't carry over from anything before. All right, so I think we have another question.
There's another question. Do you keep?
The question was.
Do you keep tracking the changes under the original project folder, or do you create a new project folder? I think you may have answered that already.
Yeah, and that's essentially what we are talking about. We create a new project folder and start from there.
Okay. One more question, Kimmy. Can you see that? It starts with RM, get these programs. Okay.
Talking about treating a number of files or directory as a single entity. Create a number of files and treat them as a single item. So the way these software systems kind of works is you can track it at the file level or you can track it at the directory level also. So it's kind of the same thing. It rolls together. So I'm sure you can track the whole directory as the same thing. The directory kind of rolls up anything that's beneath it. I hope I answered that question, or are you referring to something else, Dave?
If need be, could we unmute Dave's and allow him to speak if necessary, Monica?
I think he just responded.
Unmute the one who called in. If you do have a question, you can do that.
Okay. Actually, Dave wrote in. He said that answered his question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see a hand raised by Oriomi. I don't know what that means, but I assume that they have a question.
I understand this is Jose Rivera, and I had a broad question, which is around the recommendations on the frequency to meet with the client to review, overall project changes and all those good things.
Yeah. So you were kind of touching on what we said at the end about going towards agile management techniques. So if agile would have its way, they will have you meet with the customer every week or every 2 weeks or so. But for us, it is typically not possible. But that's kind of where we want to get at. Is we want to be, we want to involve the customer. We want to involve all the parties that have a stake in it as much as possible. So, I can't fully answer that question for you. I can just say, as much as possible is always the right answer here.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if there are any additional questions, feel free to type them into the question and answer Q&A box. In the meantime, I just want to say to all of the attendees, thank you very much for your participation and particularly for the questions at the end. And my hope is that this fog surrounding configuration management has now fully lifted since we have now completed this CM series. Nishant, thank you very much for the contribution of your time and expertise. Your presentation was very insightful, and we wish the best for you and for Avid Solutions. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. May I ask that all of the attendees complete the survey for today's webinar. It'll arrive in your inbox very soon after the webinar ends, and your feedback to us is important for our continuous improvement. And honestly, it takes less than 30 seconds to just answer a few quick questions. So in closing, here are 4 important considerations for you. I look forward to seeing many of you at the conference next week, and if we've never met, I ask you to please introduce yourself. Number 2, the CSIA Best Practices Workshop has exceeded enrollment, so another workshop will be scheduled, so watch for details on the connected community in the future. And third, our statistics program has been significantly revamped, is now focused more on KPIs and not so much on chart of accounts. So it's so significant that the name has changed. It's no longer called KPIX, but now called Pulse. So keep an eye open for details, and there will be a session at the conference describing Pulse. And number 4 and last is the Exchange website is growing in usage, so be sure to have your best face on with a great profile for your company. In fact, we encourage you to upgrade to the Gold profile. It's really not very expensive, and that gives you the best exposure for clients. So I see that there have been no additional questions. So with that, I just want to say, again, thank you very much for attending. This is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for attending, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.